As we said, we are studying in Ephesians chapter 6, and mainly the last 3 weeks we have been focusing on the first two verses there and speaking about the relationship between parents and children. We're on lesson 15 in our study guide, if you're following along there, and the author titles this lesson, Submission in the Fear of God. And so the first 9 verses of Ephesians chapter 6 deals with different types of submission, parents and children. Later on, we'll get into what we, for our society today, what would be an employer-employee type relationship there. It's kind of considered the master-slave relationship. And so a lot of these things, our relationships with others is one of submission for our brothers and sisters, and even in some way, people in the world. Even back in chapter 5, there was some mention of this, and so we need to realize that all of us in some way are submissive to others. And so this is a very good study for us to look at, in-depth look at these areas in our life. One reason is, in our society, a lot of people say, do what makes you happy, do what's good for you. And it's all about pleasing yourself. And that's just not scriptural in any way. And you'll see it on T-shirts, you'll see it on other things, coffee mugs, those type things. And that type of attitude is not scriptural. And so we need to understand that we are submissive, or should be submissive, to several different people and authorities and all of that in our life. And it's not just about what makes us happy. And so to kind of set the stage for our study this morning, we'll go ahead and again read the first 4 verses of Ephesians chapter 6. It says, Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and your mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth. And you fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. And so for the first 3 studies that we've looked at this chapter, we focused on verse 1, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. And in the first part of verse 2, honor your father and mother. And so we did an in-depth study of what exactly we're talking about when we're looking at those different phrases, and we looked at different ways, pros and cons on those things. And I think it was a very good study for us to look at those in that in-depth manner. As we continue this morning, we will spend just a little bit of time on the last part of verse 2 and then move on into verse 3 and 4, Lord willing. But as we said, children, honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise. And so that phrase there, the first commandment with promise, this commandment in particular is the key to all human relationships and the passing on of a righteous heritage. And so we've talked about that, how that this primary relationship, this first relationship that a child begins to understand as they begin to grow and to try to develop their own personalities, their own way of thinking. This is the first kind of core relationship, the family unit. And so this is a very important relationship. There is some disagreement about what exactly is meant by, this is the first commandment with promise, because it's, other commandments seem to have promises connected to them, and maybe even some before this one. And so, you get to reading in the commentaries, and there's a lot of different opinions as far as what exactly is meant by this phrase, this is the first commandment with promise. And I don't really plan to wade into that discussion. If somebody here has some comments that they would like to bring out on it, you feel free to do so. But what really is key to me, and what it seems like he's trying to get across here, is that, with this phrase, there is particular emphasis on honoring our father and mother. And I think he is putting that emphasis on this relationship, and on this proper relationship of honoring our father and mother. And so I think is key to a lot of things. And so the emphasis is put there with this phrase, and exactly what this phrase means, I'm not 100% sure. Does anybody have any comments, or do you see that? I know, Dylan, you've studied on it. Did you come to any conclusions?
To me, I think I mentioned this to you. To me, this is one of the first and foremost type of commands that, to me, put in effect, that needs to be put in effect. It's that primary concern of the Lord, because like you mentioned, it's not one of the first of the Ten Commandments. It's not even one of the first, or not the first of the Ten Commandments. It's not the first commandment with a promise associated. It's not first with a positive, first with a negative. So I think it's a primary concern of the Lord, which I think is really your point.
Yeah.
Children obey their parents. They honor their parents.
Yeah. So, any other comments, or does anybody see that any differently? So, without a doubt, it's an important point for us to take note of, and I think this phrase just reiterates the importance of this relationship and how we should, as children and parents, be sure to cultivate this relationship properly as those of us who are parents, as we try to raise our children, and as grandparents, as we try to help our own children raise their children. All of these things should be a primary concern when we go about doing those things. And those who are children, we need to make sure that we honor our parents. And so as we move there into verse 3, it says that it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth. And so this promise involves both the quality and quantity of life, that it may be well with you and that you may live long on the earth. So not only will a full life be achieved, but also a life that will be protected from the pitfalls of wickedness, which cause an untimely death. And so, in his commentary, David Lipscomb, I think, does a good job explaining this, or I really couldn't do it any better than he does here. He says, this blessing is the heritage of dutiful children in every land. The obedience of childhood and youth rendered to a wise Christian rule forms in the young the habit of self-control, self-respect, diligence, promptitude, faithfulness, and kindness of heart, which are the best guarantees for happiness and success in life. And so if this relationship is formed early on, and there is that respect for authority, and we have parents who are instilling those type things into the children, those relationships will grow. It will be the basis for other relationships the child will form. They will respect authority. When you tell a child not to go out into the highway and play, they're going to respect that authority and not do that. And so, therefore, the pitfalls that they may encounter, if they disregard that authority, they will not encounter those, and therefore the danger won't be there. And it makes, in general, for a longer and happier life. Any comments along those lines? So just in general, righteous obedience to God is conducive to a longer and happier life. It's not the only factor, but it's a primary one. Maybe a primary one or the primary one, but obedience to God helps us live a longer and happier life. Disobedience is a symptom of an undisciplined and an unruly life. This type of life is usually associated with vice and riotous living. These things under normal circumstances will shorten one's life and result often in heartache. Obedience saves us from these sorts of things. It saves us from the heartache. It saves us from a lot of the addiction and things like that go along with this type of life when you get into alcohol and drugs and things of that nature. When you're disobeying the laws, maybe speeding, those type of things, all of that comes into play. And as we live this obedient life, under normal circumstances, these sort of things will help us live a longer and happier life. So as we conclude this section here, we see the child the child-parent relationship is one that should be of honor and obedience. The child should it begins with our relationship in the Lord. We talked about how this was right, and this is what God wants. So obedience, our relationship begins with our obedience and honor begins with our relationship in the Lord. Obedience and honor are right. Obedience and honor are commanded. And then obedience and honor produce blessings. And so, as we've reiterated time and time again over the past 3 weeks, this is an important relationship and one that we should not take for granted, and we should put a lot of emphasis on. So as we finish up the first 2 verses, again, are there any comments or questions or anything that anybody would like to make before we move on into the next verse? All right, as we begin with Ephesians 6 and verse 4, we have this admonition to the fathers. It says, "And you fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord." And so we'll focus here in the beginning on this first phrase, "And you fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath." And so this admonition given to the fathers can also be looked at as a type of submission. And in doing so, submission in the sense that there must be an understanding of the disposition and needs of the child so that we as fathers will not provoke our children to wrath. And so we must take time. We must try to understand. We must be patient so that we can understand the personalities and so forth of our children, so that we might not be pushing them to this point where we are provoking them to wrath. And children vary, vastly between one child and the other. And, what might be okay for one child and might not provoke them to wrath, the other child, it might do that. And so we need to understand the personalities and so forth of our children to make sure that we are not doing this. And so when we're looking at what it means to provoke, it means to exasperate. It's doing things with injustice or needless severity. Sometimes, especially fathers, you see that they just really like to aggravate their children to the point where it makes them mad. And we see this a lot in that father-child relationship. It seems like fathers a lot of times are prone to do that, to push their children to the point where it exasperates them or it provokes them to wrath. Colossians 3 and verse 21 just reiterates this. It says, "Fathers, do not provoke your children, lest they become discouraged." And so it's reiterated there as Paul was writing to the Colossians there in chapter 3 and verse 21. And so the point is, we don't need to do things that will make us lose our children. We don't need to be acting in such a way that we're pushing our children away from us and then therefore away from God. Parenting in a godly manner will be both a blend of firmness and gentleness. And so we can't be one of those all the time. At times you're going to need to be firm, but at times you're going to need to be gentle. And so as fathers, we need to recognize that and try to understand when it's time for us to be firm and when it's time for us to be gentle. And those of you who are children in this audience, you need to understand that the parent has to be firm with you sometime. Just because you may not like what they are saying doesn't mean that they are provoking you to wrath. It means a lot of times they're being parents. And even though it may upset you, it may at that point it may be what you need to hear. And so just because they're telling you something that you don't want to hear does not mean that they're provoking you to wrath. But sometimes it may be. And so as fathers, we need to understand, this line that we are walking to try to be the type of person that's both firm and gentle. And it's not always easy. And so, our children may respond negatively in the moment. and it may be a big fight, especially as your children get older, being teenagers, early teens, and as they get more and more independent, those things are going to be a lot of times more difficult to handle, and it's a balance of trying to give them enough freedom to be the person that they need to be without being so firm that we're provoking them in an unwise manner. So, over time, they will come to love and to understand, what we are trying to do for them. And as I think somebody made this point either last week or the week before, as parents, we are going to make mistakes. And no one in here is perfect, and you're going to overreact. There's going to be times where you lose your temper. You may say things, you may even spank them in too rough of a manner, or things like that, and things like that are going to happen. And so, but you need to recognize those, you need to make those things right, and ultimately, as a child grows and matures, then they will understand those things, and by the time they become a young adult, they will respect the concern and the willingness you had to go through those tough times and to try to correct them and get them pointed in the right direction. So a parent must, as we said, must understand the personality of his child and mold those inherited traits in such a way that will not provoke the children to rebellion and hatred. So I thought we would, like we did with, what are some ways that we can honor our parents? I thought we might look at some ways that, we as parents or as fathers can provoke our children to wrath. And as we go through this list, if anybody has any comments, or if you're thinking of one maybe that we don't cover here, feel free to speak up. But, I found a few. I did a little research and was looking at things I could think of as well. But, the first one is, it's probably the one that we think of first when we're looking at this passage, and that is being overly harsh with discipline and rules. And so, as we said, a child needs structure. They need firmness. They need, they need a path to walk. But sometimes as parents, we can be overly strict. We can be unfair in our punishment. And by doing so, this can cause anger and bitterness in our children. And there again, I'm not talking about, your little child that you take, you take a toy away from them that they don't need at that point, or, there's things like that. And they get mad and they, what we call, pitch a little fit. I know my mother-in-law called it pitching a duck fit. And so, they do that sometimes, and that's okay. But we're talking about being, overly harsh and doing, trying to make them walk too straight of a line, because they, after all, are children, and they need time to be a child. If a father is too harsh, it can lead to feelings of resentment rather than fostering respect and growth. And so, many of us who had godly fathers and godly grandparents, we understood that line. They were the type of, we understood that we had this freedom, but when it got to that point, that's where it stopped. And we learned where that line was. And they were gentle, they were kind, they were loving. And then when it got to that point, the firmness kicked in. And we knew where that point was. And so as fathers, we need to try to develop that sort of relationship with our children where we can allow them to be children in these areas and give them time to play, give them time to laugh and to cut up and things like that. But then when it's time to be otherwise, they know, okay, this is the line and I don't cross that line. And so it takes time, it takes understanding, and it's just something that we as fathers and as parents need to try to figure out, and it's not always easy. I read where somebody said, and I don't really know how I feel about this phrase, but I thought it was interesting, and somebody in here might have some comments on it. But But they said, never say no when you can say yes. Never say no when you can say yes. And, there's probably a lot tied up in that. And I was thinking about that. I'm like, is that a good rule to live by or not? But I think the point is that we need to be willing to give our children the freedom and the things that they need the freedom. And so we need to give that to them. But, and there will be times that we need to say no. But if we can say yes, and there's really no good reason for us to say no, then maybe we need to go ahead and say yes at some point. And so I thought that was an interesting phrase, and I don't know if I would quite take it that far. Maybe, I don't know, but it's that idea of allowing our children to have that freedom to have the things that they desire, but yet when it comes to that point that we understand that, well, it's not good for them to have these things. There's a reason there that we may say no. And it could be a very simple reason, or it may be, well, they had a new toy last week, and so, I can afford to buy them a new toy this week, but that's just going to teach them that, every time they want a toy, they're going to, and that's just not a good thing. And so there's a reason maybe that we would say, no, you're not getting a new toy this week, because they need to learn to understand that. And that's not really the things that I think the person was saying here. It's just, maybe they want to go outside and play, and there's really no good reason for them not to go outside and play. Let them, maybe let them go. But there might be a good reason. It might be cold. It might be raining or any number of things. So we need to find that balance when we are disciplining our children and when we are allowing them to do things. Any comments along those lines?
We, or at least I know I did, and, I know that's the way that my parents did us, just because we were the parents, and just because we were the parents, doesn't mean we're always right about things. We're still parents, but, in this provoking, children, it's up to us as parents to realize that we may be doing that. Sometimes I know I'm a parent, and I said so. Sometimes that's acceptable. That's all things. But based on what you were saying, sometimes, we say no just because we want to say no. And that might not always be the right thing to do, but as parents, we, at least I know for my own self, sometimes you don't need to say no, even though you want to. And if that's just a continual thing, if your child wants to do this and you continually say no, then we're provoking them, and there'll be a time when they're going to blow up, or they're going to rebel back. And as parents, I think it's up to us to realize that that's what we're doing. We may need to say, okay, I'm going too far here, I just need to, for lack of a better word, give in. That's not really giving in. You're just making a decision to not provoke the child. But once you do that, there can be, it may not be, usually it goes away, I think, but there's some resentment there, well, I know what he's going to say. He's going to say no. Our children don't need to think that about us, I don't think. Well, he's going to say no. I know he always said no.
Yeah. And sometimes, I was thinking as you were talking, as parents from a different generation, sometimes we don't maybe understand the interest of our children. Maybe we're interested in hunting and fishing and stuff like that. And so we have the son that has no interest in that, but yet he's interested in something else. And so just, we don't understand that. And to us, we think it's stupid. And so we think, but in our youth, maybe we had the same sort of thing, except it was just different. And our fathers thought the same thing. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to look at those things, and if they enjoy it and there's nothing wrong with it and they're staying out of trouble, maybe we should let them do that. And because they enjoy it. And if not, they're going to be looking at other things that maybe they would get in trouble with. They're going to be out riding around breaking laws and stuff like that when they could be, playing this game or something with friends. And so I think as fathers, we need to try, when we have sons especially, it seems like it's sons and fathers that probably have these issues more than others. But we need to look at what they're doing, and if there's really nothing wrong with it, and a lot of times we can find things that are good with it if we just look hard enough. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to do that.
Shane, one of the things do you think anyone else, if we provoke our children, if we continually do that, does sin? Have we sinned by doing that?
Well, if it's if we're provoking our children needlessly, I think it would be a sin.
Yeah. And I do too.
And there again, there's that fine line. It may be something they may be spending too much time, too much money, and we may need to rein it in some. And so we need to watch for those things. And it's all about moderation. And that's a key thing that we need to be instilling in our children, because our society doesn't understand moderation. And some things are good and right, we can do those things, but yet if we can take anything to an extreme. And so, do what?
I was going to say something. I didn't realize you were
That's fine. So we need to teach moderation and allow them enough leeway to be happy and not to provoke them, but yet teach them moderation. So did you have something else you want?
Well, it just seems like to me, right there, Ephesians 6:4, and you fathers do not. It seems like a command.
Yeah.
And so do not provoke. So
Yeah.
it's a command to look great. I think it's certainly done.
Yeah. It's definitely a sin on the part of fathers if they do so, and it may not be knowingly, but it's still a sin. If we don't understand that we're doing it, and we're still sinning. And so that's why it's so important for us to understand what these things are and how we can go about that. And because it's a sin, whether we intentionally do it or unknowingly do it, it's still a sin.
I'm just thinking, children, I've seen people that would just barely discipline a child, makes a child angry.
Yeah.
I can never remember being angry at a discipline. It's always
Yeah.
Sometimes we may not go far enough.
Yeah, and that's true. That's true. And we've got to make sure we understand where that line's at. And so we can't be overcautious and stay on this side of the line, and we can't be, and then we can't be just over oppressive either. So it's not an easy thing. And all these things, the young people in this room, these are things that you need to understand before you decide to get married and have children, because it's not an easy thing to do. It's hard. It's tough to raise children. And so you must be willing to walk these lines in order to do it properly.
Shane, one other thing, I always think about this right here, and I've heard this, and I just think, that's not right. This is going to hurt me more than it hurts you. It took me a while to kind of understand that, but there's a lot of truth in that stuff,
Yeah, if you're disciplining your children right, it's not going to be an easy thing to do. Now, if it is easy and you're really wanting to whip that child, then I think you've gone over to the anger, and maybe you need to step back and wait to discipline your children. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think sometimes it's a mistake for us to discipline our children when we're angry, because we can go too far and then lead into an area where we're provoking them to wrath. And I didn't even put that in my notes, so that's a good point there to make sure that we're not disciplining them out of anger. We're doing it out of love for them and wanting to correct them in a proper manner. And so, we can be overbearing, we can be overly harsh. Another thing we can do is be inconsistent. And inconsistency is, it can ruin a lot of things, and especially the parent-child relationship. If a father's inconsistent in his expectations or discipline, children are going to be left as, feeling confused. They really don't know what to do. And have you heard a child say, well, it doesn't matter what I do, he's going to be mad either way, so I might as well just do what I want to do. And, sometimes they're just striking out because they're angry. But at other times it may be true. It may be true that you can't really predict what your father is going to do because they're so inconsistent. It depends on the type of mood that they're in. If they're in a good mood, then they're going to be A-okay with it. If they're in a bad mood, then they're not. And so we need to make sure that we are consistent with our children, because inconsistency can be frustrating, and it will lead the child feeling that they're being treated unfair. It's more likely, they may feel that they're being treated unfairly one way or the other, but it's more likely to lead to these feelings of unfair treatment if we are not consistent. And so it's, as we said, I think I mentioned it briefly earlier, how hard it is sometimes to be consistent. Sometimes you're just too tired and you don't want to deal with it, and so you let things slide. And then the next time it happens, you're right on top of it, and you snap them up. And so we need to, whether we're tired, whether we're in a good mood or a bad mood, we need to try to keep everything on an even keel and therefore be consistent. And our children will respect us more for that. And I think we will have better results in getting them to respect our authority if we do so. Any comments along those lines?
Also extend between the mom and the dad.
Yeah.
Because if you do it then, when inconsistent, kids play that.
Yeah.
They know who's the more lenient or who's the most likely to go up to.
Yeah.
Dad is testing each other.
Yeah. And so children are very good at doing that. And so parents need to be on the same page, and you need to understand what expectations are between your spouse. And therefore, and it may be one of those things. I know kids hate it when the parents say, well, I need to talk to your mom or I need to talk to your dad. They want the answer, they want to push you when, they want to conquer and divide. They don't want you to get together and talk about it. But sometimes that's exactly what you need to do. You need to stop and converse with your spouse, and that way you're on the same page. And so that's a good point as well.
Shane, just kind of a humorous side, I don't mean to occupy a long time, but I guess I'll think the same. But as we were growing up, as I was, and I had two brothers and two sisters, my mom, she was home with dad working, she was home with, so she'd give a lot of discipline, and she was pretty good at doing it too,
Yeah.
But I recall over the years, and I thought about this a good bit, you say, we do something, you say, okay, so when I'm laying one up for you, and she might say that for a week, and then, she'd say, so the next time you do something, I'm gonna get you. I might not get you right then, but I'll get you. And, we knew she would, and, she was real good because we'd run if we could from her, and she'd say, son, if you run, I'm gonna get you work. Okay. But, I think back, the humor side of things, is she would give us a lot of times right when we went to bed. We'd be in bed, and we couldn't get out of there, and she'd come in there, and, she would get us. And, it got to a point, where we would try to, of course, you're a kid, you're in bed, you're putting the covers up over your head, and your mom's trying to spank you, it'd get to the point that we would laugh, and she'd start laughing too, but she said, son, I'm still gonna get you. She would. Many times she'd get us like that. It was just got some good memories to think back, she was a disciplinary, she took care of things.
Yeah. Sometimes as parents, we have to be creative in in how we go about our discipline. Any other comments there?
Shane, I think if you look up the word, I already lost the word.
Consistent?
If you look up the word aggravating,
Okay.
in the dictionary, it's got John Chumley's name on it. Many who are sitting in this audience are victims of his aggravation.
Yeah.
That was his way of expressing his love in a playful way.
Yeah.
And I've always told several here, I think Kelly Maddox is one of them, because he really did like to walk up and knock the purse off his shoulder. I said, well, Dad loved you. And some others might say, well, I said, well, he did love you, obviously, because he didn't aggravate you, but that's myself. But I can't think of a time that he ever provoked me. Now, thumping the ears was pretty provoking. It would make me mad when he did it. But he never did anything intentionally to provoke. But he was a disciplinarian. And, Mom was too. But at the same time, she handled a lot of it by saying, when your daddy gets home, he will take care of it. And I'd rather have a spanking than him talk to me lots of times. It was less painful. Because the talks were always good. They were always made to, let's get this point across. Make sure you understand this so that it will help me. And that's just, that's a different way of handling things, but it wasn't to make you mad or to provoke you.
So, the key, I guess, with the comments that Gary and both David are making, they had very strict parents. But yet at this point in their life, they look back on that with love and affection. And, it's not, here they are all these years later, and, they're not resenting their parents. It's not this bad feeling, but it's this warm feeling that you have these parents that love you and wanted to make sure you understood where you needed to go and what you needed to do, and did whatever they could to do that. And so, young parents, you need to understand that. You may, in the moment, it may feel very bad to do that, but to guide your children in a way that they need to go. Ultimately, if it's done right, again, you're going to make mistakes. But if you're consistent and it's done with love and it's done, by the scripture, you're praying and you're studying, and more than likely your kids are going to be talking about you like David and Gary. And so it's a wonderful thing to have parents that are willing to do that.
And David and I were not bad kids. Just to point that out.
Okay, we need to be consistent. The next one I have on my list is neglect or abandonment. And of course, we often think when we use those two words, we think about a father that's absent, that is physically absent. But what we need to understand is, certainly that is wrong. We don't need to be absent from our children's lives. We need to be present. But a lot of times, neglect or abandonment can happen even with the father living in the same home and seeing you every day. They're neglecting you emotionally. They may neglect you physically. But a lot of times you have these fathers who neglect and abandon their children while they're even living in the home with them. And so, children need love, they need guidance, they need involvement in their life. And when those needs aren't met, then again, you have a child that is more likely to act out and be rebellious. And so we don't need to neglect our children. I know working, you're tired almost every night, and you want to come in and you just want to decompress. I know Saturday's your only day off, and so you want to do something for you, but your children need you. You made the decision to bring these children, these humans into the world, and so now you've got to make those sacrifices. And you've got to be there. You've got to be in their life. You can't neglect them. We see so many women today because of immorality, you have these people, all these sexually immoral people, and you end up with a woman that's raising children by themselves, and the statistics are just, mind-boggling on that. But fathers need to be in the lives of their children. And it's very important, and we don't need to neglect or abandon them. Any comments on that? Showing favoritism can provoke our children to wrath. Favoring one child over another. This can cause bitterness, resentment, and even anger among siblings. My siblings and I, we always kid our parents about who is the favorite. I mean, we all really know it's me, but they like to think it's them sometimes. But we do a lot of kidding with that, but it can be serious, especially, like I said, if you have maybe a father with two sons, and the interests of the sons are vastly different, and so the one that the father connects with the most, that's his favorite, and that favoritism is evident in the way he treats him and the way he disciplines. He's not as harsh with his discipline, things along those lines. That can bring up a lot of resentment in this other child who doesn't connect with his father in those interests and things like that. And so, it's going to take more effort for a father to be involved in the life of their child if their interests don't really coincide. They might rather be out in the woods hunting, than doing these other things and than throwing a baseball. And so we need to make sure that we don't show favoritism. That way the children, they don't feel rejected or unloved, or they don't have this feeling that they can never measure up to the expectations of their father, maybe like this other sibling. And so it's very easy to fall into that trap, especially if you have several children. Like I said, interest, children can, it amazes me at how different children can be that come from the same two parents, but they can be vastly different. And if we are not careful, we will favor one over the other. And it's a very hard thing to do, or hard thing to avoid sometimes. So I have a few more that we will talk about, Lord willing, next week. If you want to think about a few ways that, if you have any comments or anything you would like to bring up next week, we can do that as well. But I appreciate everyone who participated and the attention of everyone here. Thank you so much.